So now that we have our firearm logic component and our fire ability, kind of laid out to where we can really start working, we want to go ahead and start kind of testing the logic. And to do that, we need to also figure out a way to, display that we are in fact shooting. Likewise, in this firearm logic component, we also need to make this as replicated. So set is replicated by default true. That would be annoying to forget. So what can we do here? So my kind of assumption is, for now anyways, we can just print out basically just a debug line, and that'll be kind of, or draw even a debug sphere even, to kind of indicate that we have shot, just so we have something that we can visually see. So for now, let's go ahead and just do draw debug line, takes in the world, so get world, and then it takes in a start and an end. So we need to make those. Now, in order to kind of, I guess, more or less complete this, we're going to need access to the SKG firearm component. And since this exists on the firearm that contains that component, we can just fetch it from the owner. So for the time being, we're just going to fetch it right in here every single time. This is not how we're going to finalize it, but SKG firearm component. Let's go ahead and forward declare it up here. And let's call it, just firearm component, and set that equal to get owner find component by class, and the class being SKG firearm component. So now that we have this, we can actually get the kind of like the projectile launch transform. So off the firearm component, we search for projectile. You can see we have get muzzle projectile transform. Takes in a 0 distance. So in our case, given the overall length of everything, we're going to do probably just 50. And for the accuracy, we'll just do, it's 1 inch at 100. We're not going to notice. So we'll just leave it at the default. So here, this outputs a FSKG muzzle transform. So muzzle transform, which contains the start position and the direction to use. So we need a endpoint, so f vector end or trace end, and that is going to be equal to the muzzle transform dot location plus the muzzle transform dot direction, and then the distance that we want to trace, which in our case, just again for testing, we're just going to do, 500. So that'd be about a 500 centimeter long trace. So for the start, we're going to use muzzle transform dot location. For the end, we're going to use trace end. Color, we're going to do F color red. And then as far as persistent lines, we're going to do false, then 2.0 for 2 seconds that it'll be alive. And depth priority 0, thickness we'll do 2.0 as well. So now every time we call press trigger, we want to basically fire off a shot. And when we call release trigger, we want to stop firing. So for now, I'm going to also expose these to blueprint. So U function, blueprint callable. I'm not too worried about a category because these are going to be, removed very soon. So we have our pressed and release trigger. Let's go ahead and hit play and just give this a try. Because once we get this working in semi, we'll have to get it working in full auto and replicating. And then we can actually go through and handle it through the ability, which is going to also allow us to go ahead and have it predictively modify our magazine attribute set. Okay, so once we are back inside the editor, I just realized we never actually added this component to our firearm. So let's do that. So let's go to our firearm.h, and we're just going to make a new U property, visible anywhere, blueprint, read only, and we'll give it a category of firearm. So this will be a D object pointer of U firearm logic component. So we'll forward declare that, and we'll just call it the firearm logic component. Now in the constructor, let's go ahead and firearm logic component equals create default subobject u firearm logic component text firearm logic component, and just include it up here. So now let's go ahead, close down the editor, recompile, and relaunch. So now that we're back in the editor, we can go ahead and go to our player pawn. Let's just grab the held actor. So off the shooter pawn component, we can search for get held actor, which will be our firearm. And we want to cast it for now to, what is it? Was it just a firearm? Yeah, cast to firearm. So this way we can just access the component. So we want the firearm logic component. So we're going to do this. So search for left mouse button. And we're going to do, yeah, actually we don't have anything on left mouse button. So when we press the left mouse button, we will simply press the trigger like so. And we're going to do the exact same thing. So we need to, on release trigger, call release trigger. Okay, let's get that a little bit cleaner. All right, so when we left click, we call press trigger. When we release it, we call release trigger. So let's make sure that this does work. So left click. Oh yeah, that's right. We are unequipping. So after we set the held actor, let's just remove this part where we unequip. Right, so we left click. And so far, nothing appears to be happening. So let's make sure this actually is running. We add a print. And it is running. I'm just not seeing any traces. Okay, so let's check our press trigger. So we increment the trigger press release count. So this should be greater than the release count, or sorry, the trigger press count. We call the on rep. So if this is true, we should be performing our debug line. So let's go ahead and print out a log. Should be shooting. Is that, yeah, that'll be a sufficient name. And I just figured out why as well. Because we don't have a muzzle component on the firearm itself, so it doesn't know where to actually get the well, to even shoot from. So, for example, if I shoot now, we should get the log like we do. So that's something I completely forgot about. So let's head to our 1911 data asset. Under the settings, go to muzzle, go to has muzzle, and we need to make some muzzle initialization settings. So to do that, let's go to our 1911 and we're going to create a new data asset and search for muzzle. So this will be muzzle initialize. So DA underscore, let's just do firearm underscore muzzle initialize. Yeah, that's probably a decent name because we want to put it here as well. So let's drag it to weapons. So it's right alongside our procedure anim initialize settings. And let's also rename this to muzzle initialize settings as well, just so we have a consistent naming setup. So let's plug that into muzzle initialize settings and open it up. So again, it takes in the mesh component of the name, or the name of the mesh component we're using, which is firearm mesh component, just like before. And then we need a muzzle socket. So open the 1911, go to the skeleton, and add a new socket called S underscore muzzle. And this here is just going to go, let's first off rotate it so it's C up and Y forwards. And we just want to put it kind of right in front of the muzzle. So that's pretty centered there. And just make sure we save. And I can't remember what exactly is in the muzzle settings. So real quick, I'm going to also create one of those. So search for muzzle again and just open it. Okay, so it's just kind of the default. So we're going to be using this as well because we're using the tag barrel. We're not going to have any muzzle devices unless they are attachments. So we can leave this as is and just call it the same kind of thing. DA underscore firearm underscore muzzle settings. And then just plug that into our 1911 data asset. So we can save all that and give this a try. So as I left click, you can see we are shooting, but we are going straight to the left. So I was actually incorrect. We need to make it X forward instead of Y forwards. So let's select the muzzle socket, currently Y forwards, just rotate by 90. So now it is X forwards. So now we have our line trace. So now what we want to do is try this as a listen server with a client and just make sure both can see the traces, which they can. So the client is seeing the server's traces and the server is not seeing the client's traces. And that is because we are running this only locally. So when we run this through the ability, we should be able to see, and that's why I was testing with the server, the replicated part. So what I mean by that is the way, I don't remember if I've explained this or not. I did, I think, in the aiming ability video, but when we activate, this fire ability here, it runs through a can activate ability function, which we are going to have to override at some point. And if that is true, it returns true or false. So if it returns true, it activates the ability locally where we actually activated the ability from. So when we left clicked ourselves, then it's going to notify the server, hey, I want to activate this fire ability. So the server is going to try to activate that ability, which is going to do the same thing. It's going to run the can activate ability function. And if it returns true, we're just going to continue right on to activate ability on the server. And if it returns false, it's just going to basically cancel out the ability as far as I'm aware and pretty much do nothing. So if the server hits the activate ability, so, can activate ability return true, the server will also go ahead and press and release the trigger. So it's going to call the corresponding pressed and released functions, which that actually brings me to a potential, I guess you could say more or less a potential problem, because this is firing an on rep, and I'll explain that here in a second. But at that point, we don't really need to worry about doing any sort of RPC inside of here because the ability is going to take care of it for us. We're just basically having logic in here rather than the ability because it's going to be a lot easier to access stuff from in here. So in regards to the replication issue that we are likely going to run into, if we look at press trigger, when we press the trigger, we ourselves are going to fire the on rep instantly because we want that responsiveness. We don't want to wait for the server to say, hey, you've increased the trigger count, the trigger press count. Let's go ahead and, fire the on rep. Instead, we just immediately call the on rep, right when we left click, and that is going to fire the shot logic. And then once we receive the replication, unless we cancel it out using other methods like the rep notify condition, we're going to end up receiving this again because the server has replicated the trigger the trigger count. So that's where the slight problem is here. So what we want to do is under params, that was not what I copied. So under params, we want to set let's do the condition to equal condition underscore skip owner. So this way it is not going to replicate the trigger count to ourselves. It is only going to replicate it for everybody else. And that's what we want. So that'll resolve that problem. Anyhow, that is going to be all for this video. And in the next video, we're going to go ahead and get the full auto logic kind of set up and going, at which point we will then move on to actually doing the logic inside of the ability. So that way everything replicates and works as expected. And then we can start working it inside with the attribute system. So I will see you then. If you like what I'm doing and you want to help support me, you can find a link to my Patreon in the description below where you can gain early access to this entire series.